Alright, no magic chef or anything, but a lot of people are afraid to make homemade bread, so I'm going to show you how I do it. It's pretty simple. I've already cleaned off my counter, and I got my stuff out. So, this is the yeast I use, Fleischmann's Active in the jar. Need 4.5 teaspoons of that. That's it for that. Put that in a separate bowl and I'll show you why in a second. You only need 3 tablespoons of sugar. Put that in a separate bowl. One tablespoon of salt. And then you need 2¼ cups. It says a lukewarm liquid. I always use hot tap water and let it run. Just really eyeball it, 2¼ cups. I put about 1/3 of it in with the yeast. The rest in with the sugar and the salt. And then I just make sure my sugar and salt is dissolved completely. So there's no grit in there and it's all dissolved. I use butter flavored Crisco. And all you need is 2 tablespoons of that. Oh, look, I used this so much it just broke it. Can Santa bring me a new set, please?
I'm sure you can. Hi, I'm cameraman #1.
Bees. I'm just going to throw that away. Bummer. I guess I can use the other ones, but I'll take that off of there. Just put that in there with the hot water, let it sit. And then I just make sure my yeast is dissolved. And it clumps up like that. You gotta make sure it's really all dissolved well. Everybody has their own way of doing whatever. You know, somebody probably has a different style of making bread. This is just my style. I've tried to show a few people how to make bread, and other people have asked, so this is probably the easiest. Is to just do it. I don't know if you can see in there along the edge, see that yeast that's gathered? And make sure that all of that's dissolved. There's clumps. I'm just looking on the bottom of it and the edges to see if there's anything stuck on the bottom of the edges. So I can get that off of there and get it dissolved. And if you think you got it all, you put it all in here. And if you still had clumps or whatever in there, just pour a little bit of this back in here. Get it off of there and then just put it back in. I do that separate because the sugar and the salt activates the yeast. So we always do that separate. And I have a sifter. I use a sifter. This is a 1/3 of a cup measurement. You can use a quarter, you can use a whatever, half, whatever. I use a 1/3 because I will, at the end, you use, just, I'll show you. I start off with 2 cups of flour in the sifter. Makes the flour finer, less clumping. And just mix that in. Flour down off the edges. And it's going to look lumpy. It's going to look like that. And then I do 2 more cups of flour in there. So now we're at 4 cups of flour. Mix it all up good.
Other recipes call for 7 cups, right? So
Yeah, the recipe calls for more than 7 cups. It's like 7 1/4 to 7 1/2 cups of flour. I never get that much flour in my bread. You don't need that much flour. It's too dry. See, this is starting to turn doughy. And it's about like that. I take a cup onto the counter. Spread it out enough. That's where you're going to put your dough. As you can see, this is really sticky. This is why I do this way. It's really wicked sticky. And then I sift a cup of flour over the top of it. So now we're at 6 cups of flour. Roughly, because look at, I mean that's not perfect. More than 6 cups, but. And then I just fold the flour into the dough like that because it's really wicked sticky in there. Just fold it in. And I make a mess, yes. really overload it with that flour when you start this. So you can work the flour into it and it's not so sticky. And you're just going to keep working this and then add a little bit more flour to the counter on the side. I'll show you when I'm doing that. So you can just slowly add it. You're going to keep working this until it feels like, well, the stickiness will be gone. And it's going to feel like more like an elastic. Still really sticky in there, and this is just adding the flour, kneading it. And you get, that's the stickiness, and that will start coming off your hands as you work the dough, and that's when you know you're getting close to being done.
Yep.
So we just kept tapping the dough into the flour and just keep kneading. See, my palms are clean now. Remember how yucky they were, full of dough? That's what happens. Now it's elasticy, it's not sticky. It's ready. I probably got 7 cups of flour in there by the time I'm done. So I take my bowl that somebody graciously cleaned for me, and I use vegetable oil.
Cameraman number 1 cleaned it.
I use vegetable oil. You can use, some people want to use olive oil or canola oil or whatever, but your dough is, I'm all full of flour. Your dough is like a sponge. It's going to absorb whatever flavors you give it. So I just use vegetable oil because it's more of a, and it's not a lot, it's just enough to coat the inside of that. And get your paper towel full of oil, and I just drop this in. Take it out, flip it so the oil side is up, drop it back in, and just put my paper towel over it, or and let it sit and rise for probably an hour. It's gonna come up to the top, and then we're gonna just punch, and then I'm just gonna separate it from the edge of the bowl and turn the bowl upside down, flip it, and drop that back in. I'm just turning the dough. So then we're gonna let it rise for like another hour. So we got probably a couple hours here before we put it in our pans. And I'll let this rise and catch up with you then. So we let the bread rise this far. We punched it down in the center. I can actually show you because now we're going to make the bread dough, the loaves. But punch it down in the center, just pull it away from the sides, take it out.
And this is the second time you did it.
And then you just let it rise that far again. Just put your paper towel over it. Let it rise that far again. When that's done, which is what I already did, just take it out of your bowl. And just cut it in half. You want to make sure that when you're going to let your bread rise, it's got a nice warm temperature, room temperature, comfortable, 70 degrees. This is an old drafty house. The kitchen isn't always warm. So sometimes what I'll do is find something to bake in the oven that takes a few hours to cook. And I'll put a rack on top of the oven. Put this on top of the rack, let the bread rise. So it gets the heat, the warmth, but not heat. Not hot heat, just warmth. And it will help it rise better. So anyway, you have it rise a second time, cut it in half. I usually make these round. And then you need to knuckle all the air out. And I try to keep it evened up. Everybody has their own style of doing bread. If they do bread, this is just mine. It works for me. It really is all about the feel and the texture of the bread. And you get all the air out. And I fold it down and up, and I just stretch it out. Slap it on the counter. And try to keep your ends even, otherwise you're gonna have, you know, it's gonna look funny. And I fold it in half this way, and then I knuckle it out again to get all your air out. Just roll my knuckles into it. And see, it's sponging back. That's the elasticity of it. There. And then I palm it. Roll it, whatever, however you want to do it. See, I got this little bulge here. It's going to look funny, so I'll just squish that in and palm it. Like that. And then again. This is getting all your air out, so that when it's done and it cooks, it looks like that without a bunch of bubbles in it. And you can just roll it. I usually try to roll it with my palms around the edges to keep the edges round. You're gonna have a seam, it's not a big deal. It's homemade bread, it's not supposed to look perfect like store-bought bread does. They have machines that do that. You're not a machine. Sometimes what I'll do is push in the middle to squeeze some of the dough out to the edge. If it's too skinny at the edge, I'll just roll it into a loaf. It's not perfect. I don't care. I got my air out. It's going to look good. I'm going to do that to the other one. Just vegetable oil in your pans. Paper towel. These are old pans. I like these pans. Got some new ones, but I prefer to use these because they're seasoned. Just drop it seam down. There's the seam. Now I got fingerprints in there. Seam on the bottom. Let it sit. I'm going to do this other one, and then we're going to let this rise, and we'll come back and show you what it looks like just before it goes in the oven. Alright, so we made our loaves, put them in the pans, covered them with a paper towel. Obviously that's with oil, always, so that just keeps them from drying. We let them rise, and again, these don't look store-bought. They don't look perfect like they do in a store because you're not a machine. It's cool in here, so I turn the oven on it. You gotta turn it at 425. Cook these for 20 to 30 minutes depending on how your oven cooks. You want to keep an eye on it when the tops of them are golden brown. So 425. I turn my oven on and I put these on top of the stove just so that they got the warmth from the oven to help make them rise a little bit. I'm going to put them in the oven and show you when they're done. Right, these took about 20 minutes. They're golden. See, they're not perfect, but who cares? I always flip them, they flip right out. Knock on the bottom. Hear that? Sounds hollow, means it's done. Same thing there. And then I always brush it. You get your little marks from the paper towel and the oil, but whatever. Brush it with butter. A little paintbrush. just softens up the crust a little bit, gives it a buttery flavor around the edge. And that's it. That's all you do. You let it cool until it's cool, you know. Wrap it up in a bag and I'll show you. When you put it in the bag, after it cools, put it in your bag to freeze it. You get your bread in your bag, bundle it up, and then just suck the air out of it. Like that. And it keeps it fresh when you freeze it. But that's all there is to it. Have fun!